Sometimes the most beautiful moments happen when we least expect them. In a world where privacy seems precious and public displays of affection can feel uncomfortable, one woman decided to turn an intimate gesture into something extraordinary. What started as a quiet personal moment between two people became a story that would touch thousands of hearts and remind us all why love, when shared authentically, has the power to unite strangers and create magic in the most ordinary places. This is the story of Catherine Mitchell, a 34-year-old teacher from Portland, Oregon, who transformed what could have been an awkward public situation into one of the most heartwarming viral moments of the year. Her spontaneous decision to embrace vulnerability in front of complete strangers didn't just surprise her partner, it surprised herself and everyone who witnessed what happened next. In an age where genuine human connection often gets lost behind screens and social media facades, Catherine's story proves that real emotion shared openly and honestly still has the power to stop people in their tracks and remind them of what truly matters. Catherine Mitchell had always been the type of person who preferred quiet moments over grand gestures. At 34, she had learned to appreciate the small things in life: a perfect cup of coffee on a rainy morning, the way her students' faces lit up when they finally understood a difficult concept, and most importantly, the comfortable silence she shared with her partner of 3 years, David Chen. Their relationship had bloomed slowly, like a carefully tended garden. They had met at a local bookstore where David worked part-time while finishing his master's degree in environmental science. Catherine had been browsing the education section, looking for new ways to make her fourth-grade classroom more engaging, when she accidentally knocked over a display of bestsellers. David had helped her pick up the books, and their conversation about teaching methods had stretched into dinner, then coffee the next day, and eventually into something neither of them had quite expected. What made their relationship special wasn't the dramatic declarations of love or expensive gestures that filled romantic comedies. Instead, it was David remembering that Catherine preferred her tea slightly too strong, or Catherine knowing exactly when David needed space to process his thoughts after a difficult day. They communicated in shared glances across crowded rooms and inside jokes that made them laugh at the most inappropriate moments. However, there was one area where Catherine had always held back. Despite her confidence in the classroom and her ability to command attention from 25 energetic 9-year-olds, she had always been intensely private about her personal life. Public displays of affection made her uncomfortable, not because she was ashamed of her feelings, but because she believed that intimate moments were meant to be kept between two people. She rarely posted about their relationship on social media, declined to attend company parties as David's plus one unless absolutely necessary, and even felt awkward holding hands in crowded places. David understood this about her and had never pressured her to be more public with their affection. He knew that when Catherine said she loved him in the quiet of their shared apartment, surrounded by her carefully arranged bookshelves and his collection of houseplants, those words carried more weight than any public declaration ever could. This understanding between them was part of what made their relationship work so well. The morning of October 15th started like any other Saturday. Catherine woke up early, despite not having to teach, because her internal clock had been trained by years of school schedules. She made coffee for herself and tea for David, who was still sleeping soundly next to their bedroom window. The autumn light filtered through the curtains, casting everything in a golden glow that made their small apartment feel like something from a magazine. She had been planning this day for weeks, though she hadn't told David about her specific intentions. It was supposed to be simple: a walk through Pioneer Courthouse Square, maybe some shopping at the Saturday market, lunch at their favorite Vietnamese restaurant, and then home to spend the rest of the weekend reading and relaxing together. She had been looking forward to it not because of any grand plans, but because uninterrupted time with David had become precious as both their careers had grown more demanding. What Catherine didn't expect was how nervous she would feel as they prepared to leave the apartment. She had been carrying a secret for 2 months now, something that had been growing inside her chest like a warm light that she was finally ready to share. The nervousness wasn't about the secret itself. She was completely certain about her feelings and her decision. Instead, it was about the method she had chosen to reveal it. David emerged from the bedroom wearing his favorite worn jeans and a green sweater that brought out his eyes. His hair was still messy from sleep, and he had that slightly dazed look he always wore before his first cup of coffee. Catherine felt that familiar flutter in her stomach that had never quite gone away, even after 3 years together. She loved him most in these quiet morning moments before the day demanded their attention and energy. "Ready for our adventure?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her waist and burying his face in her neck. His voice was still rough with sleep, and Catherine could smell his shampoo mixed with the faint scent of the lavender detergent she used on their sheets. More ready than you know, she replied, trying to keep her voice light despite the hammering of her heart. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind dozens of times, but now that it was approaching, everything felt different than she had imagined. They took the bus into downtown Portland, sitting close together in the back seat while Catherine watched the city wake up through the window. Street vendors were setting up their stands. Early joggers moved along the sidewalks, and the Saturday market was already bustling with activity. David pointed out a new mural that had appeared on the side of a building they passed, and Catherine nodded and smiled, but her attention was focused on the small box in her purse and the weight of what she was about to do. Pioneer Courthouse Square was crowded with the usual weekend mix of tourists, locals, and street performers. A man was playing guitar near the fountain, his case open for donations, while a group of teenagers practiced skateboard tricks on the steps. The farmer's market had spilled over from its usual location, with vendors selling everything from handmade jewelry to organic vegetables. Catherine and David found a relatively quiet spot near the edge of the square, close enough to people watch but far enough from the main crowd to have a conversation. David was telling her about a research project he was working on, something about urban sustainability and green spaces, but Catherine found herself unable to concentrate on his words. Instead, she was watching his face, memorizing the way his eyes crinkled when he got excited about his work, the gesture he made with his hands when he was trying to explain something complex. "Are you listening to me?" David asked suddenly, and Catherine realized she had been staring at him with what must have been an obvious expression of distraction. "Sorry," she said, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "I was just thinking about something. Want to share?" David's voice was gentle, and he reached over to take her hand. This simple gesture, which they had done hundreds of times in private, felt different in the public space. Catherine could see a woman with two young children watching them from a nearby bench, and an elderly man feeding pigeons who had glanced over when David touched her hand. This was the moment Catherine had been both planning and dreading. She had thought about doing this in their apartment, or during a private dinner, or on one of their hiking trips where they could be completely alone. But something had driven her to choose this crowded public space instead. Maybe it was because she wanted to challenge herself, to step outside the comfortable boundaries she had built around their relationship. Maybe it was because she had realized that hiding their love, even from strangers, was a disservice to how deeply she felt about David. "Actually," Catherine said, her voice catching slightly, "there is something I want to share with you." She reached into her purse and felt the small velvet box that had been living there for 2 months. Her hands were trembling as she pulled it out, and she could see David's eyes widen as he realized what was happening. "Catherine," he said softly, and she could hear the surprise and emotion in his voice. The noise of the square seemed to fade away as Catherine looked into David's eyes. The guitar music, the chatter of the crowd, even the sounds of traffic from the nearby street all became background to this moment that felt both terrifyingly public and intensely private. "David Chen," she said, her voice stronger now despite her racing heart, "you have made every day of the last 3 years better just by being in it. You make me want to be braver, kinder, and more open to all the beautiful possibilities in this world." She could see people around them beginning to notice what was happening. A young couple stopped walking to watch, and she caught sight of someone discreetly pulling out their phone. Normally, this kind of attention would have made Catherine want to disappear, but something about this moment made the presence of strangers feel like a blessing rather than an intrusion. "I know this isn't how people usually do this," Catherine continued, getting down on one knee right there in the middle of Pioneer Courthouse Square. "But I realize that I don't want to hide how much I love you anymore. I want everyone to know that you're the person I choose, today and every day for the rest of my life." The crowd around them had grown larger, and Catherine could hear someone gasp as she opened the small box to reveal a simple but elegant ring. She had chosen it herself, spending weeks researching and saving until she found something that felt right. Not too flashy, but beautiful and enduring. "David Chen," she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet square. "Will you marry me?" The silence that followed Catherine's proposal felt both endless and instantaneous. In reality, it probably lasted no more than 5 seconds, but to Catherine, kneeling in the middle of Pioneer Courthouse Square, with her heart laid bare and a ring box trembling in her hands, those seconds contained entire lifetimes of possibility and fear. David's face went through a series of expressions that Catherine would remember for the rest of her life. First came shock, his eyes widening and his mouth opening slightly as the reality of what was happening sank in. Then came something that looked like joy mixed with disbelief, as if he couldn't quite trust what he was seeing and hearing. Finally, his face settled into an expression of pure love that was so intense Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes. "Catherine," he whispered, and his voice broke on her name. The crowd around them had grown to at least 30 people, and Catherine could hear whispered conversations and the soft clicking of phone cameras, but all of that faded away when David dropped to his knees in front of her, bringing them to the same level on the concrete pavement of the square.
"Catherine," he said again, louder this time, his hands reaching up to cup her face. "You beautiful, brave, incredible woman." Catherine felt the first tear slide down her cheek as David's thumbs gently brushed her skin.
She had never felt more vulnerable or more certain of anything in her entire life. "Is that a yes?" she asked. She could hear her own voice shake with laughter and tears. Instead of answering with words, David leaned forward and kissed her. It wasn't their first kiss, or even their most passionate one, but it was the kiss that sealed their promise to each other in front of a crowd of strangers who had become accidental witnesses to their love story. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, and Catherine heard someone shout she said yes, which made her laugh because technically David hadn't actually said yes yet, but his kiss and the way he was holding her made his answer abundantly clear. When they finally broke apart, David was grinning so widely that Catherine thought his face might split in half. "Yes," he said clearly, loud enough for everyone around them to hear. "Yes, Catherine Mitchell, I will absolutely marry you." Catherine's hands were shaking so badly that David had to help her get the ring out of the box. It was a simple platinum band with a small but beautifully cut diamond that caught the afternoon light as David held out his hand. Catherine slipped it onto his finger, amazed by how right it looked there, as if it had always belonged. "I can't believe you did this," David said, pulling her to her feet and into another embrace. "My shy, private Catherine just proposed to me in the most public place in Portland." "I wanted everyone to know," Catherine said, surprising herself with how true those words felt.
"I wanted the whole world to know that I love you enough to be brave." The crowd was beginning to disperse, but several people approached them with congratulations. An elderly woman with kind eyes and a warm smile told them she had been married for 52 years and that their love reminded her of her own early days with her husband.
A young father with a toddler on his shoulders said his daughter had clapped and asked if they were in a movie. A teenage couple, probably on one of their first dates, looked at Catherine and David with the kind of wonder that suggested they were seeing a preview of their own possible futures. Most surprisingly, a professional-looking woman in her 40s approached with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, "but I just had to tell you that watching your proposal gave me hope. I've been divorced for 2 years, and I had started to think that kind of love wasn't real anymore. Thank you for showing me that it is." Catherine felt overwhelmed by the response from strangers. She had always assumed the public displays of affection were somehow selfish, imposing private emotions on people who hadn't asked to be involved. But the reactions they were receiving suggested something completely different. Their love, shared openly and authentically, seemed to be giving other people permission to believe in their own possibilities for happiness. David seemed equally moved by the responses. He kept his arm around Catherine's waist as they talked to well-wishers, and she could feel him occasionally squeeze her gently, as if he was still making sure this was really happening. A young man with a professional camera approached them hesitantly. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, "but I'm a photographer and I was here taking pictures for a travel blog about Portland. I caught some shots of your proposal, and they're beautiful. Would you like me to send them to you?" Catherine's first instinct was to decline. She had never been comfortable being photographed, especially not in emotional moments. But something about this day had changed her perspective on privacy and sharing. She looked at David, who nodded encouragingly.
"That would be wonderful," she heard herself saying.
"Thank you for capturing this moment." As they exchanged contact information with the photographer, Catherine realized that her definition of privacy had fundamentally shifted. It wasn't about hiding their love from the world anymore. Instead, it was about choosing when and how to share the most precious parts of themselves. Today, in this crowded square, sharing had felt right in a way she had never expected. The guitarist who had been playing near the fountain approached them with a huge smile. "That was the most beautiful thing I've seen all week," he said. "Would you mind if I played something for you, a celebration song?" David looked at Catherine, deferring to her comfort level, but Catherine found herself nodding enthusiastically. The guitarist launched into a joyful acoustic version of "Can't Help Myself" by the Four Tops, and several people in the remaining crowd started clapping along. Catherine had never been the center of attention like this before, but instead of feeling exposed or uncomfortable, she felt celebrated. These strangers, who had no obligation to care about her happiness, were choosing to share in her joy.
It was a kind of human connection she had never experienced before. As the song ended, David took her hand and led her to a quieter corner of the square where they could have a moment to process what had just happened. "I still can't believe you did that," David said, shaking his head in amazement. "When did you start planning this?" Catherine thought back to the moment 2 months earlier when she had first known with absolute certainty that she wanted to marry David. They had been hiking in the Columbia River Gorge, and David had spent 20 minutes patiently helping a lost family find their way back to the main trail. Watching him offer his water bottle to their young daughter and explain the trail markers with genuine kindness had made Catherine realize that she wanted to spend her life with someone who moved through the world with such natural generosity. "I've been thinking about it for a while," she said. "But I bought the ring 2 months ago after our hike to Multnomah Falls." "You've been carrying that ring around for 2 months?" David asked, incredulous. "I kept waiting for the perfect private moment," Catherine admitted. "But then I realized that maybe the perfect moment wasn't about privacy at all. Maybe it was about being brave enough to love you out loud."
David's eyes filled with tears at her words, and Catherine realized that her decision to propose publicly had given him something he hadn't even known he wanted: validation that she was proud to be with him, proud enough to claim him in front of strangers. "I love you so much, Catherine," he said, pulling her close.
"And I love this new brave version of you. I think she was always there," Catherine replied. "She just needed the right reason to come out." As they stood together in the square, watching the normal Saturday afternoon activities resume around them, Catherine felt a profound shift in how she understood their relationship. It wasn't just about the two of them anymore. It was about the family they would build together, the community they would create, and the love they would share not just with each other but with the world around them. The photographer approached them one more time before leaving, showing them a preview of one of the photos on his camera's small screen. In it, Catherine was on one knee with the ring box open, but instead of looking at David, both of them were looking into each other's eyes with expressions of such pure love and joy that Catherine gasped when she saw it. "You two are going to be very happy," the photographer said simply before walking away. Catherine looked around the square one more time, trying to memorize everything about this place where her life had just changed forever. The fountain where the guitarist had been playing, the steps where the teenagers had been skateboarding, the bench where the elderly man had been feeding pigeons. All of it had become part of their story now.
"Ready to go celebrate properly?" David asked, squeezing her hand. "More than ready," Catherine replied, but as they started to walk away, she realized that the celebration had already begun the moment she decided to love boldly and publicly. Everything from here on out would just be the continuation of a joy that had started in the most unexpected way, in front of a crowd of strangers who had reminded her that love, when shared authentically, has the power to unite people in the most beautiful ways. 3 days after the proposal, Catherine was grading papers at her kitchen table when her phone rang.
The number was unfamiliar, but something prompted her to answer instead of letting it go to voicemail.
"Is this Catherine Mitchell?" asked a warm female voice on the other end.
"Yes, this is Catherine," she replied cautiously. "My name is Sarah Chen, and before you ask, no relation to your fiancé." The woman laughed. "I'm calling because I was at Pioneer Courthouse Square on Saturday and I witnessed your beautiful proposal. I hope you don't mind me reaching out, but I got your number from the photographer who was there. I wanted to share something with you." Catherine felt a flutter of anxiety mixed with curiosity. In the 3 days since the proposal, she had been processing her decision to make such a private moment public, and while she didn't regret it, she was still adjusting to the idea that strangers had been affected by their personal moment. "I'm listening," Catherine said, settling back in her chair. "I was at the square with my teenage daughter that day," Sarah continued. "She's 15 and we've been going through a really difficult time. She's been struggling with depression and anxiety, and honestly, she's been pretty cynical about love and relationships. She keeps saying that genuine love doesn't exist anymore, that it's all just for social media or movies." Catherine found herself holding her breath, unsure where this conversation was heading. But when she saw your proposal, something shifted in her. She started crying, happy tears, and she said it was the first time she had seen real love that wasn't performed for an audience. She said you looked scared but brave, and that David looked like he couldn't believe how lucky he was. She's been different since then, more hopeful, more open to the possibility that authentic connection is real. Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes. She had never imagined that her moment of vulnerability could have such a profound impact on a stranger, especially a young person who was struggling. "I wanted to thank you," Sarah continued, "for showing my daughter that real love exists and that it's worth being brave for. You gave her something I've been trying to give her for months.
hope. After hanging up the phone, Catherine sat in her kitchen for a long time, thinking about the responsibility that came with sharing genuine emotion in public spaces. She had acted on instinct that day, driven by her love for David and her desire to overcome her own limitations, but she was beginning to understand that the impact had rippled far beyond their personal relationship. That evening, when David came home from work, Catherine told him about Sarah's phone call. They were cooking dinner together, David chopping vegetables while Catherine stirred pasta sauce. When she shared the conversation,
"That's incredible," David said, setting down his knife and turning to face her. "I mean, I knew what you did was brave, but I hadn't really thought about how it might affect other people."
Neither had I, Catherine admitted. I was so focused on my own fears and feelings that I didn't consider we might be giving something to the people who witnessed it. Over the following days, more people reached out. The photographer, whose name was Marcus, sent them a beautiful collection of photos from that afternoon, along with a note explaining that he had shared one image on his professional photography blog.
the response had been so overwhelmingly positive that he had written an entire post about the power of witnessing authentic love in public spaces. The blog post had been shared hundreds of times on social media, and Marcus forwarded Catherine some of the comments.
People shared their own stories of public proposals, of moments when witnessing strangers' joy had restored their faith and love, and of times when someone else's courage had inspired them to be braver in their own relationships. One comment particularly struck Catherine. A woman named Elena had written, "I saw this post 3 days after I decided to leave my husband because I thought we had lost the spark in our marriage. Something about seeing this couple's joy reminded me that love isn't always fireworks and grand gestures. Sometimes it's about choosing to be vulnerable with someone who has earned that trust. I'm still working on my marriage, but I'm fighting for it now instead of just walking away." Catherine read the comment aloud to David while they were getting ready for bed, and he sat down heavily on the edge of their mattress. "Wow," he said quietly. "That woman is staying in her marriage partly because of what you did last Saturday." "Partly because of what we did," Catherine corrected. "Your reaction was just as important as my proposal. People saw how you looked at me, how you treated that moment as sacred even though we were surrounded by strangers." David reached over and took her hand, running his thumb over the simple engagement ring she now wore. "I still can't believe my shy teacher girlfriend turned into this brave woman who proposes in public squares and changes people's lives." "I'm still shy," Catherine laughed. "I'm just learning that being shy doesn't mean I have to hide the things that matter most." 2 weeks later, Catherine was walking through the mall after school when a young woman approached her hesitantly. "Excuse me," the woman said, "but are you Catherine Mitchell? The woman who proposed at Pioneer Square?" Catherine was still getting used to being recognized, but she nodded and smiled. "That's me. I'm Jessica," the woman said, "and I was there that day with my girlfriend. We've been together for 4 years, but we've been afraid to talk about marriage because her family has been unsupportive of our relationship. Seeing you propose to David, seeing how happy and proud you looked, gave us the courage to start planning our own engagement."
Jessica pulled out her phone and showed Catherine a photo of herself with a beautiful woman, both of them grinning widely and showing off matching engagement rings.
"We got engaged last weekend," Jessica said, "and we told both our families at the same time."
It went better than we expected, and even if it hadn't, we realized that we didn't want to hide our love anymore. We want to be as brave as you were that day. Catherine felt overwhelmed by the responsibility and honor of having played a small role in Jessica's happiness. She hugged the young woman tightly and congratulated her on her engagement. That evening, Catherine called her mother for their weekly phone conversation. Her mom, who lived in Seattle and had been following the blog post and social media attention with fascination, had been full of questions about Catherine's newfound comfort with publicity. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart," her mother said. "But I have to ask, are you okay with all this attention? I know how much you value your privacy." Catherine considered the question carefully.
The attention had been overwhelming at times, and there were moments when she missed the simplicity of their private relationship. But there was something profoundly meaningful about discovering that their love could inspire others to be braver, more hopeful, and more committed to their own relationships.
"I'm okay with it, Mom," she said. "Actually, I'm more than okay. I'm grateful. Grateful for strangers commenting on your personal life?" her mother asked, skeptical. "Grateful for the reminder that love isn't meant to be hoarded," Catherine replied. "David and I have something beautiful, and sharing that beauty with other people doesn't diminish it. If anything, it makes it stronger." A month after the proposal, Catherine and David were featured in a local newspaper's weekend magazine. The article,
titled Love Out Loud, When Private Moments Become Public Inspiration, included Marcus's photos and interviews with several people who had been affected by witnessing their proposal. Sarah and her daughter were interviewed, with the teenager explaining how seeing Catherine's bravery had helped her believe in the possibility of authentic love.
Jessica and her girlfriend shared their story of finding courage to be open about their own relationship. Elena, the woman who had reconsidered leaving her marriage, spoke about the importance of fighting for love instead of giving up when things get difficult.
The most surprising interview was with Robert, the elderly man who had been feeding pigeons that day. At 83, he had been married to his wife for 60 years before she passed away the previous spring. He told the reporter that watching Catherine and David had reminded him of his own proposal to his wife in 1962, and that their joy had helped him feel connected to love again during a period of profound grief. "Love doesn't end when someone dies," Robert said in the article. "But sometimes the pain makes you forget what it felt like to be filled with that kind of joy. Seeing those young people choose each other so openly reminded me that the love I shared with my Margaret is still alive, still worth celebrating." Catherine cried when she read Robert's words, understanding for the first time that their decision to love publicly had created space for others to honor their own experiences of love, whether current, past, or hoped for in the future. The wedding planning process became an extension of the values Catherine had discovered that day in Pioneer Square. Instead of a small private ceremony like they might have chosen before, Catherine and David decided on a medium-sized celebration that would include not just family and friends, but also some of the people whose lives had been touched by their proposal. They invited Marcus to photograph the wedding, Sarah and her daughter to attend as honored guests, and they made a point of incorporating elements that celebrated the power of community and witnessed love. Instead of traditional wedding favors, they made donations to local organizations that supported couples and families facing challenges. 6 months after the proposal, Catherine stood in her wedding dress, looking out the window of the hotel room where she was getting ready. She could see Pioneer Courthouse Square in the distance, and she thought about the version of herself who had knelt on that concrete 6 months earlier, terrified and exhilarated and completely unprepared for the ways that moment would change not just her life, but the lives of people she had never met. Her maid of honor knocked on the door, announcing that it was time to go. As Catherine picked up her bouquet and prepared to walk down the aisle to marry the man who had said yes to her brave proposal, she carried with her the knowledge that love, when shared authentically and courageously, has the power to create ripples of hope and inspiration that extend far beyond the two people at its center. The shy teacher who had been afraid of public displays of affection had learned that some moments are too beautiful and too important to keep hidden. Catherine Mitchell had discovered that the greatest gift she could give to her community was the example of loving bravely. And in doing so, she had given others permission to love bravely too. As she walked toward David, surrounded by family, friends, and the strangers who had become part of their story, Catherine understood that their love had never been just about the two of them. It was about the hope they could offer to others, the courage they could inspire, and the reminder they could provide. That authentic connection was not only possible but worth fighting for. The proposal at Pioneer Courthouse Square had lasted less than 5 minutes, but its impact would continue for years to come, rippling outward in ways Catherine could never have imagined when she first decided to be brave enough to love out loud.